Hello and welcome to Things We Said Today, our weekly podcast about anything and everything to do with the Beatles, both as a group and as solo artists, past, present, things to come, if we can figure them out. I'm Alan Kozin, and I'm being joined by my three regular co-hosts, Ken Michaels, who you know as the host of the syndicated Beatles radio show Every Little Thing. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Alan. Hi, everyone.
And Steve Marinucci, as I always like to say, probably the world's last full-time Beatles reporter. You can read his work in Billboard and Access.com, that's AXS.com, and he's still doing other kinds of reporting too. It's not just Beatles. It's all over the music world. Hello, Steve.
Hello, thank you, Alan. Hello, Alan. Hello, everyone.
And Al Sussman, the executive editor of Beatle Fan magazine and the author of the book Changing Times, 101 Days That Shaped a Generation. Hello, Al.
Hi, Alan. Hello there, everybody.
Okay, so do we have any news items to cover this week?
Actually, we were talking before we started about the 1964 concert tape that didn't sell.
Right.
But everybody kind of suspected that wasn't going to sell. But that wasn't what I was going to bring up. I wrote yesterday about that Ringo Starr YouTube trailer that everybody had been posting and saying, wow, can't wait for this documentary. And there was very little evidence to support that there was anything more than a trailer. And I got confirmation yesterday that indeed it's not official and it's being looked into by Ringo. So
being looked into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They don't know who's behind it. So it was strange because I saw some people who are usually pretty knowledgeable posting it and saying, can't wait for this, and nobody bothered to look. Everybody kind of assumed. It's a slick little piece, I have to say.
Yeah.
But they're not doing anything. Ringo's not involved with it. So
what's it about, actually?
Well, it's called Ringo Starr, Peace and Love, The Life and Times of Ringo Starr. And so it sounds like it's supposed to be a biography of him.
Yeah.
And in fact, the clips that they show are all old clips. I think there's most of them are from A Hard Day's Night. So they just basically stole a couple of clips from A Hard Day's Night. And there's one other clip in there, I can't remember what it's from. And they threw a couple of comments on top of it, and they did this very slick editing job, but it has nothing to do. Ringo's not involved with it. So they're trying to find out who's behind it, and there's no website for it. The website links to Ringo's, but giving the air that it's not.
That is very strange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially if it is, as you say, a slick little piece. But then again, the weird thing is that none of us heard of any such thing being in the works, and we're relatively ever keep our ears close to the ground.
Right. I felt like you did. I think everybody kind of got the impression, when they heard about it, like, wow, where'd this come from? And unless, it's somebody doing something, on the side, unauthorized. But none of that stuff is, most of the stuff that Hard Day's Night is copyrighted. So I don't know where this is coming from, if anything is happening at all.
Yeah.
But,
well, the way electronic stores used to have Christmas in July?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe now we're having April Fools in November.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So and I was also in the 64 tape. That the issue there, as you and I discussed in email, is that the tapes that have been previously marketed as being Forest Hills have been Philadelphia. And in fact, I sent you a follow-up note, and maybe you can answer it now. Forest Hills has never, to my knowledge, and I kind of did some looking, has never come out.
No.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
There's some question about whether any such thing actually even exists, but
right.
no, it's never been never been bootlegged or anything. So, yeah.
The one that was called Whiskey Flats, that's Philadelphia, right?
Right, right. And that's the one that they used. That's the one that they used to say it was Forest Hills. They did not. You're right, Alan. This time they did not. Even though the description said there were clips, there were no clips of it that I could find online.
Yeah.
But and a writer whose name I will not mention, who usually knows about these things, mentioned the Forest Hills tape and was really excited, thinking that there was something about it, and of course there is not, or at least it doesn't appear to be.
Yeah, I did answer your question last night about whether it had been out, and I sent a something that someone pointed out. In the description that they give, they talk about the Beatles' reaction as one of the young female fans goes, racing past the barrier or something, and that made me think that it could possibly be an edited concert, using material from different concerts, because that thing about the Beatles' reaction as someone gets past the cops is pretty much in the Shea Stadium concert. I mean, it could have happened more than once, I suppose, but
Sure.
That sounds like that. So I mean, who knows? Who knows what this thing is? Basically any legitimate seller is going to allow clips that will allow people to identify it, because they're expecting people to spend a lot of money, and nobody is going to do it if they can't hear that it's not something that's already out there and that this is misidentified,
Mm-hmm.
So
Makes it more suspicious that they haven't allowed you to hear any of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So well, until 6 months from now when they try to auction it again, I guess that will be that.
Yeah, I mean, it was auctioned actually it was less than 6 months ago. It was in August. So what is that? 4 months ago?
Yeah.
So we'll see if it shows up again.
Yep. Okay. So we thought this week we would sort of commemorate the 15th anniversary of George Harrison's passing by looking back on his career and just sort of another thing that we're bouncing off. I mean, apart from the anniversary itself, there is in one of those fascinating extras that comes with the 8 days a week Blu-ray. Someone does make an interesting observation that in any other band, George Harrison would have been the front man.
Right.
Peter Asher said that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like a good time to look back at his career in broad terms. We've looked at individual albums, but his career as a whole, we haven't, I think, done in a while. So, who wants to start? Ken?
Gosh, there's a million things I'd like to talk about with George.
Yeah.
Especially he's such a fascinating person and a fascinating musician and artist. I think of him as being one of the greatest songwriters of all time, and I say that for his full body of work. And as we all know, and it's been said a million times over, being in a band in which you've got John Lennon and Paul McCartney in there, you're going to be overshadowed. And in the course of those 7 years that the Beatles were recording for EMI, George only got to have about 24 songs of his own on Beatles records. And one of the great benefits of the Beatles breaking up was that you got to see George really flourish as an artist, which he did on his own. And you got so much more music out of George than you ever would have had the Beatles stayed together and continued with the same kind of format of 2 songs per album from George.
Yeah.
But just for All Things Must Pass alone, which a lot of people look at as being one of the great triumphs. In some cases, a lot of fans look at it as being the greatest of all the solo Beatle albums. Just for that alone, he deserves so much credit because all those songs were really wonderful. And it just tells you, and I always remember, and I bring this up every now and then when people talk about the Beatle breakup, I like to bring up a quote that Yoko said, which makes more sense when it comes to discussing why the Beatles broke up. And she said that there was way too much talent to keep contained in that band. And all you got to do is listen to All Things Must Pass, and there's proof right there. And that's from someone that contributed less as a songwriter than John and Paul. So, that's just one aspect of it all. I mean, his work as a slide guitarist. I think it's one thing to have a style of your own as a songwriter, which George does, but also as a slide guitarist, too. He has a sound that as soon as you hear it, you know that it's George.
Right.
And I think that there are a lot of people who are influenced by his work as a slide guitarist, which you don't really hear people say too much. Every now and then I'll come across a song being played on the radio. And as a matter of fact, there's one song that I get to hear quite often because I'm in an environment where I hear a lot of country music. And I think, Al, you're into more current country, right?
Well, not really the current country.
Okay.
I'm old school.
But every now and then I'll hear a song where I'll say, wow, that sounds like a very Harrison-esque sound and guitar solo.
Oh, yeah.
And Toby Keith had a song called A Little Too Late, which was a hit about 10 years ago. You listen to the guitar solo on that, and it sounds so much like something George would have come up with. And you can point to a lot of songs that are like that. And George just doesn't get nearly the credit. You know, everybody brings up, he was great in the Beatles, and he had a few big hits on his own. And obviously My Sweet Lord being huge, and the big comeback with Cloud 9. But you don't hear enough about him as being a great guitar player and someone influential as a guitar player. So those are just two things out of many that I could bring up here. But I would like to bring up one thing, which is kind of important to me because I like to read a lot of what's on the internet and social media, from articles, all kinds of articles from musician magazines. And I do feel that over time, since George's death, there's been a growing respect for his solo catalog. It's just something that I've picked up from a lot of stuff that I've read. And it could be more so with George than with John or Paul or Ringo. In the case of John and Paul, because, John and Paul get so much credit. So a lot of people want to point to George and say, wow, but look at what he gave us. And I do feel a growing respect that I've picked up. And not just All Things Must Pass as an album and Cloud 9, but most of his solo catalog. Just the fact that he was very consistently strong with his music and putting out, really great songs. So that's just a few things that I would bring up.
Yeah. Okay. Al?
Well, as a matter of fact, just to kind of follow up on what Ken was just saying, that may be because of the fact that, obviously the McCartney catalog post-Beatles catalog is so voluminous, it's almost hard to get a grasp of the whole catalog. But George, because of the fact that especially since in the last, 20 years of his life, he only recorded actually 2 albums that were released, during his lifetime under his own name, not counting the 2 Traveling Wilburys albums, and then plus the 1 posthumous album Brainwashed. So his post-Beatles catalog is not that big, and so it's especially after this amount of time, it's fairly easy to get a good perspective on it. But actually, and Ken mentioned again the small catalog of his Beatles songs, and yet, despite the fact that it's so small, note for note, it's right up there, with almost the best. I mean, a song like Something can be spoken of in the same terms with the greatest of Paul McCartney's ballads. And,
or John Lennon's ballads.
Yeah, exactly. And as a matter of fact, early on, even though You Like Me Too Much and I Need You are not really considered to be kind of major songs in the Beatles canon. They were actually among my favorite songs on those sort of early mid-period Beatles albums. And he did work that was very unusual for that time. I mean, a song like "Don't Bother Me," especially with the arrangement that was that George Martin gave it, has an exotic sound to it that really is very different from what else was on those very early Beatles albums.
Right.
And then of course he began hitting his stride in '65. In fact, George Harrison is probably even more so than John Lennon responsible for kind of bringing folk rock to the Beatles. Chiefly because of the influence that, as he was then known, Jim McGuinn had on George and on the group. And obviously a song like "If I Needed Someone" is about as folk rock as you can get, as is in fact "I Want to Tell You" on the Revolver album. And of course, back then when we were teenagers back there in the '60s, we didn't have the musical sophistication to be able to appreciate the Indian music tracks. But boy, you listen to "Within You, Without You," and maybe even especially "The Inner Light" now, and they are just absolutely gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so his Beatles work, even though it's there's not that much of it, still stands as major works, and major contributions to the as I call it, the Rolls Royce of pop music catalogs. And plus also his now I'm not a musician, but through the Beatle years, his work as a guitarist, you could see the progression from him being a young guitarist, very much influenced by Carl Perkins and Scotty Moore, to developing his own style. And while the slide guitar aspect of it is more from the solo years, he certainly had developed into a fine guitarist by the time the group called it a day, sort of. And as a matter of fact, Ken mentioned how underrated a slide guitarist George was, and I remember, in fact, I saw a reference to it this morning on social media that Eric Clapton, during that brief tour of Japan in 1991, said that George was, I think, possibly the best slide guitarist he'd ever heard.
Wow.
That's sort of unusual given some of the slide guitarists he's worked with. I mean, Duane Allman, just to name 10.
Yeah, yes.
Really?
Can
I ask one question?
Sure.
I'm sorry, good.
No, I was going to say that George's work as a slide guitarist is very characterful, and as Ken says, you hear it, for 2 seconds, and you know exactly who it is and everything. But in terms of outgoing virtuosity, someone like Duane Allman was in kind of a different class in a way. I mean, they were doing different things, But, I mean, it's sort of like, Ringo versus Ginger Baker. It's not the same kind of drumming, and it's not the same intention, but anyway. Ken, what were you going to say?
Yeah. I was just struck by that one comment you made, Al, that George, perhaps more than John, was more responsible for bringing folk rock into the Beatles. What about Bob Dylan's influence on all of them? I mean, John loved Dylan, and George loved Dylan, and
in fact, I think probably
they all did.
Even though John showed the more overt Dylan influence quicker, through songs like "I'm a Loser," I think George probably absorbed more of Dylan's influence as time wore on, plus the fact that he developed a personal friendship with Dylan that Lennon really never did.
Yeah, you can certainly pick that up in George's solo music.
Yeah.
Very heavy Dylan influence in certain songs.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I hear Pisces Fish, I think of a song that could be Dylan influenced. So
yeah, exactly. Which is probably why Bob signed on and was able to blend in so well with the Traveling Wilburys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, hello.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Alan.
It's your turn, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I had three things I was going to bring up. The first thing actually was the fact that George came to the U.S. before the Beatles did, and I think he kind of led the way without really knowing. I mean, because they weren't famous at that point. But I mean, I thought that that's a major cool thing that he did that, and he played with people over here, and that whole DVD, the Benton, Illinois thing and stuff. I mean, that's really a lot of fun. And then the fact that I think Ken mentioned the Indian music thing. I mean, but the fact that he introduced the world to Ravi Shankar or made Ravi Shankar more well known, especially to rock fans. Every time I think about that, the set he played at Monterey, which is absolutely amazing if you listen to it. And having been lucky enough to have seen them both. I mean, I did see Ravi Shankar and Ala Raka together when I was in junior college, and it was a great show. But the thing that I was really going to bring up, and I'm kind of plugging myself to do it, is that I just finished and sent off an article to Billboard this afternoon, and I called it George Harrison's Greatest Bits. One of the things I did after he passed away was I put together CDs of George's guest roles on various other people's records, and I did a list of my 10 favorites, and I posted actually a couple of them today on my Facebook page, but I'll mention those too, and just say you can look at the rest of them on Billboard because it should be up by this. Hopefully, it'll be up by the time. Actually, it should be up by tomorrow if things go well. But one is the Dwayne Eddy theme for Something Really Important, which if you guys have heard that, have you all heard that?
Yeah, that's a great instrumental.
Yes, absolutely. I think that is probably combined with the other one I'm going to mention, one of my two absolute favorites. I mean, I was listening to that again today, and I just kept playing it over and over and over again. I absolutely love that song. And apparently the album I was looking to see if the album was still in print, and apparently it's not, which really is a shame. I mean, you can get it on Amazon, but it's not cheap, which is really too bad. That deserves to be reissued. I mean, McCartney is on that album, that Dwayne Eddy album. A whole bunch of people are on it, and the other one is Punch Drunk by Ruby Horse, which is really you guys have all heard that one, I assume. And the story goes that they asked George to be on the track, if he would play on the track, and he actually agreed. I mean, these guys are really nobody, and he asked, and he played on the track, and they're a great little group. I mean, I've heard other songs by them, and they have actually a couple of albums, and they have kind of a George style to them, but I mean, if you look into the songs that he did with other people, and if you have Christopher Englehart's Beatles Deeper Undercover, it goes into a lot of those. He did some great work with other people, and you can hear his very unique style. I mean, he's done some great work. So
Well, matter of fact, Alan probably remembers this. There was, I guess, maybe like 20 years ago, there was a massive bootleg collection that came out of all of his guest appearances called Spot the Looney.
Right.
Which
Okay.
was like five discs worth
Mm-hmm.
of all of his guest appearances.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's great stuff. I mean, Basketball Jones is on there. Most people don't aren't aware that that's George Harrison playing guitar
Right.
on Cheech and Chong's Basketball Jones.
I have the CDs that I put together, and I have four of them in my hand. And I had started to put together a fifth, and it never happened. I don't know why, but I mean, some of the tracks I have on here, "That Kind of Woman" by Eric Clapton,
Yeah.
"Try Some Buy Some," obviously by Ronnie Spector, "Cost to Find Town" by Splinter. Which, in looking up this afternoon, those are not on CD here. They're on CD in Korea if you want to pay $20 a piece for them, which is really a shame.
The Splinter album, by the way, "The Place I Love," is a great album, and it's got George's imprint all over it.
Right.
Yeah.
He's got like 3 different roles on the album, which is crazy.
Yeah.
"King of Broken Hearts" is another song. Ringo's "King of Broken Hearts."
Mm-hmm.
He plays on Alvin Lee's cover of "I Want You, She's So Heavy,"
Mm-hmm.
which is really kind of fun.
Right.
There's the Rodney Krishna Temple. There's just so many so many really good tracks that he is on.
It's worth
Yeah.
pointing out because we did our show last week on Apple Record Company, and if you were to compare all 4 Beatles and their involvement with Apple, George did more than all of them.
Yeah.
More than any of the Beatles. He produced more. He played on more of their records. Not to give the Beatles, a lot less credit because they were all involved with the record company. But George, worked with Billy Preston and Jackie Lomax and Badfinger and Doris Troy, and there's so many artists on Apple that he helped. And especially Jackie Lomax. It's really, he put a lot of effort behind that particular album. So,
Yep.
Very true. And and also, since Steve mentioned Ravi Shankar, the soundtrack to Raga was on Apple mainly because of George.
Not to mention the Ravi Shankar concert from Festival of India from New York. Was another. Yeah. There was some talk at some point about sort of George and Ringo running Apple because, after the breakup, even because John and Paul were not particularly interested and they were both kind of keen on producing things. Do you remember that? Anyone else? Was it me?
No.
Not
No.
really, no.
I seem to remember reading something about that it was something he was interested in doing, and it just didn't come together because there was so much infighting.
Yeah. It makes sense.
Well, fortunately, there is so much to say about George that all of the stuff I was thinking of, I don't think any of you did, or the stuff that you did, I still have stuff left over,
Oh, good.
Okay, and in a certain way, George was a really kind of paradoxical guy, on one hand, he could be extremely funny, things like, we think of the lines in Hard Day's Night, which were written for him, but they seem to suit him really well, like the meeting that he has with the advertising guy, I'd be quite prepared for that eventuality and that kind of thing. And those are dead grotty. We turn down the sound and say rude things. Those seem like things that George actually would say, just based on his humor elsewhere. And he also, on the other hand, had this kind of strangely bitter side. Maybe not so strange. Given that what he was bitter about was the what they went through during the touring years, and that the film sort of touched on, but I don't think got really to the heart of it. I mean, the heart of it is in George's words. They gave us, they bought the records, they gave us their money, but we gave them our nervous systems.
Right.
Then there is the musical aspect as a player. He was a lot of his things were just perfect for the songs they were in. Yet, now we know, thanks to the Lewison recording sessions book, I guess, exactly how, and not to mention bootlegs that have early takes, we know exactly how hard he worked on those things. I mean, some of those early takes, even of something like I Saw Her Standing There, which they'd been playing for quite a while by the time they got into the studio, he's kind of wandering around not quite there. And it could just be that, even though they'd played it for a while and he was probably fine with it live, maybe in the studio he wanted to reach for something, and in the early takes wasn't getting it. I mean, the finished solo is fine, we know also about, for instance, I'm Only Sleeping, where, he painstakingly wrote out the notes of the solo as he wanted them to appear when the tape was recorded backwards and flipped over, It was like there was nothing accidental about that. He was getting a sound that you couldn't get from a straightforward guitar performance, but he wanted the notes he wanted, and it took some planning to do it. I think they spent a whole day on that. And yet, on the other hand, when it came to something really sizzling, like on his own Taxman, Paul's playing it. And Paul's playing the lead on You're Gonna Lose That Girl, very bluesy, which you would think would be right up George's alley. And you sort of wonder, in a way, how did these things happen? What were the discussions that led to okay, Paul, you play lead on Taxman? I don't know.
And yet, conversely, you've got a track like Here, There, and Everywhere, where he does these lovely little, one note, 2 or 3 note fills, which really helps to make it this gorgeously simple love song.
Yeah. That's right. He could come up with, very tasteful things that you don't really think of if you're thinking of lead guitar solos, I mean, there's all through the Beatles catalog, you hear them, and when you look at them in concert, you see him doing them. They're just these little fills and little texture things going on basically all over the place.
There's one that's a real favorite of mine, and that's what he played in Till There Was You.
Yes.
That guitar solo was very flamenco-ish, and you don't really hear that in the rest of the Beatles catalog.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was just perfect for that song.
Yeah. I also wanted to, when you were talking about Apple, of course, there are George's own Apple, early Apple albums, not counting All Things Must Pass and the Apple conventional albums, but Wonderwall and Electronic Sound. Electronic Sound, you could probably take or leave. George could certainly take or leave it. He I think was a little embarrassed about it in some ways. We talked about Avant-Garde and Avant-Garde a Clue, and which he attributed to Alvin Lee. But and we know also from Bernie Krause, who helped him set up his synthesizer, that it could be questioned how much was George actually doing it and how much was Bernie Krause showing him what to do. I suspect that George edited the tapes into something with a shape of some kind. I kind of like that album, even though it's probably not something you listen to an awful lot. But I love Wonderwall. I mean,
me too.
Wonderwall was just, when it came out, it was just great, and most of it was instrumental, and it was all kinds of instrumental. You had Indian stuff. You had like cowboy music. You had,
Yeah.
just straightforward rock. You had, and just track after track, it just kept changing. And I used to listen to that thing over and over and over when it came out. And that was something, it was unlike anything any of them would have done. It's completely a George kind of project. And I guess it's the thing about George. He was sort of a little bit off to the side, He wasn't writing just conventional pop tunes. I mean, he did a bunch of them for the Beatles, but as he was really coming into his own, then suddenly it was, I Want to Tell You and Love You Too and Within You and Without You and, these things that he was just doing what interested him. And it was great stuff. And I think, as Al said, we didn't necessarily all appreciate it at the time. We wanted to hear, the straightforward rock tracks.
Yeah.
But those were, those really have worn well over the years. And even, George Martin has said so too. I mean, even he kind of admits to not having been that into it at the time, but seeing it now is really kind of brilliant, particularly Within You, Without You. So
the fact that George could absorb all that at such a young age.
Yeah.
I mean, just to witness the arrangement between the Indian instruments and then all the string section, the Western influences, that must have been something fascinating. And the same thing with Wonderwall music too. I would have loved to have seen George working with these Indian musicians. And I've always been curious because he's the composer on this music. Did he know exactly what he wanted, or you just have a rough idea and the Indian musicians just improvised?
Yeah, It's hard to say. I mean, I kind of think it was probably more the latter. I think he was, in certain ways where some of the Indian stuff goes, I think he was more of a collector of sounds and then an arranger of those sounds he collected. Because those guys knew what they were doing, I think, much more thoroughly than he did. He was sort of new to it. Whatever his role was, I mean, there's a whole school in contemporary classical music of found music, where you and also in contemporary art of found art, found objects, where you find something and you do something with it and you make it yours that way. And I think there was a little bit more direct or authorial intent in his things than that, but it will never really, I don't think, get to the absolute bottom of what he did with the Indian things, but the results stand up. So, and they also, to us now, are him. So, I think those were my major points. Again, the sense of humor coming through the Wilburys, coming through, certain ways that he would write a line, that the Wilburys was a perfect group for. And one other thing is a certain sort of out there, cheekiness that, John had a lot of, but, John didn't write Sue Me, Sue You blues or Not Guilty or I Me Mine or, all of these comments about the Beatles pretty much while the Beatles are going on. I mean, Sue Me, Sue You blues was a bit later, but Not Guilty, there's Not Guilty and I Me Mine. I mean, I was listening to I Me Mine yesterday and thinking, it's kind of clear what he's saying here. What are the others thinking about that? I mean, John is waltzing with Yoko and, during the film of him sort of playing it for the first time for everyone, but is anyone listening to the words and thinking, okay, this is one of his grievances, that it's
sure
everyone is just sort of out there for their own ego, and and in a certain way he was too, but he wasn't pushing it the way they were, and he was getting frustrated by that. There are those outtakes from Let It Be where he's talking to the others and he's saying how many songs he's got. That he's got enough for a couple of albums, which I guess became All Things Must Pass. And you look at the tracks of his that they at least ran through during Let It Be. And you've got, I think Hear Me, Lord. I think you've got All Things Must Pass. You've got
Beware of Darkness.
Yeah,
Right.
there's a whole lot of stuff, and
Wah Wah.
he's bringing it, Wah Wah, yeah, and he's bringing it in, and he's playing it, and I guess they're sort of shrugging,
Yeah, the attitude is let's try Get Back again.
Yeah,
You know.
or Maxwell.
Or yeah,
Right.
oh God, yes.
Alan, you were mentioning the Let It Be outtakes. We've the bootleggers have gotten a hold of some of his unreleased stuff too, his solo stuff, and boy, some of that stuff is just so good, and it's really frustrating that the Harrison family have held on to, have had such a tight string on his unreleased output. It's too bad because it's not like some of the. I mean, there are some of the unreleased stuff that comes out. You kind of get bored with, but some of the stuff that we've been lucky enough to hear is really beautiful, and it's really too bad that they haven't thought that it deserved to be released. It's really a shame.
I think
still
so.
remember.
Might be released. They could be stretching this out for as long as they want to.
Yeah, but I still remember that interview that he did with Timothy White at the beginning of 2001, I believe, right about the time that All Things Must Pass was being remastered and reissued, and he talked about the fact that he was planning on putting out this multi-record set that would have outtakes and live performances and all kinds of things, and at least to this point in time, it hasn't happened.
Right.
Yeah, he mentioned the title "Portrait of a Leg End."
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and I have to wonder if Brainwashed was really part of that, because Brainwashed is really a collection of a lot of songs through the years. It wasn't all just recent songs.
Right.
Stuck Inside a Cloud is supposed to date back around 1978 or so.
Yeah.
So, maybe that was part of what George envisioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very possibly. Very
Yeah.
possibly. And again, going back to what Ken was saying about the, kind of reappreciation for George's solo catalog, a lot of people over the years have kind of poo-pooed albums like Extra Texture, for instance, and
Somewhere in England.
Somewhere in somewhere in England.
I can think of someone that was.
Yeah, I can think
when
of
it
someone
came out.
who's rather very close to this microphone, and Gone Tropo, which we discussed a few weeks back, and but especially albums like Dark Horse and Extra Texture, which a lot of people have kind of sloughed off as, well, he was being preachy and it's dull and it's boring, and then you go back and listen to them again, and a song like The Answers at the End is just an absolutely gorgeous song, and obviously resonates quite a bit.
It's one of my favorite songs from his solo career.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if I'm remembering correctly, your all-time solo Beatles favorite album is?
Well, it's my all-time favorite album, period.
Really?
Yes, Living in the Material World. I do love that album to death. I really do. And in a way, well, another thing I wanted to say was that I think George Harrison, even more so than John or Paul, has touched me more with his lyrics, because I find George's stuff to be far more personal. I mean, let's face it, John's stuff was very personal, sometimes a little too personal. But a lot of what John wrote about was about his feelings about Yoko. Most of what George wrote about was his own personal feelings about the world and about himself, and it was more of a universal message with a lot of spirituality in there. And that's another thing George doesn't get enough credit for. Yes, it's great to bring up the Indian music, but along with that came a lot of people who started to listen to what George had to say and to explore spirituality and maybe look into Eastern philosophy, because of George and because he brought that to the Beatles.
Mhm.
But there's so much, very personal stuff that George put into his music, and especially on Living in the Material World. When I hear songs like The Light That Has Lighted the World, which originally he wrote for Cilla Black, but you can easily imagine what he's saying in that song about his own life, that he's not the same person that he once was. Don't just think of me as Beatle George. I've moved on, that kind of thing. You can easily get that interpretation from a song like that. So he's saying, what's in his heart about himself, his feelings about the world. A lot of his songs, part of the magic about concerning a lot of George's stuff is that you can interpret some of the songs that he's written as not only being about God, but also being about a woman at the same time.
Sure.
Like What Is Life is a perfect example of that. But yeah, when it comes to George, there's so many wonderful things to bring up about him. But Living in the Material World, songs like The Light That Has Lighted the World, Be Here Now is the Within You, Without You of his solo career. Because it's like a mantra. It's very slow, very few words in it, but what he's saying is so extremely powerful, to live in the present, to not just live in the past. So, and that is all, to me, is one of the greatest love songs ever written by anybody. And to me, it's on a par with Something. And I think if that had been a single and gotten some airplay, a lot of people would know it more and would recognize it as such. But George has written a lot of great ballads and love songs throughout his solo career. So, yeah, I love Something, don't get me wrong. And there's a reason why there have been so many cover versions of that song, because it's such a great love song. But, That Is All. Your Love Is Forever is an amazing song. Dark Sweet Lady. It's there's so many of them throughout his solo career. And
Beautiful Girl.
Beautiful Girl is great. Learning How to Love You. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
From 3 1/3. And listen to that beautiful acoustic guitar solo in the middle. It's gorgeous. And these are all songs that are just undiscovered or not really well-known gems from his catalog that deserve as much attention as Something, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Steve, when George died, did you cover that for your paper?
Well, that's back when I was working. That was when I was working for the Mercury, and yes, I did. We put out special sections, I believe, at the time, and I did do some of that. Yeah. Yeah, that was a very. I mean, the Lennon. I remember the Lennon's death. I mean, that kind of blurred by because I was so busy writing at the time, and that was the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did do something with Harrison. I don't remember a whole lot about it at the moment, though, but I did. Why do you ask, Alan?
Because, I wrote his obit for the Times, and I remember it really pretty vividly, actually. In fact, I remember somehow finding out that he had died at like 5 a.m. or something. I'm not sure what I was even doing up, but
yeah, I don't think I was doing any. I don't think I was doing any of that. I don't think I did the main story. I think they had me doing some background. I do remember they gave me they told me to go out and buy books about George, and I spent a wad, and they reimbursed me for the whole thing.
Oh, that's the deal.
There's the deal, yeah. So I remember that because I remember picking up the Times book or the Rolling Stone book. That's what it was. The Rolling Stone.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
we're getting that, which had just come out at the time.
Yeah. We had, everyone sort of knows probably that newspapers write obituaries of really famous people in advance, right? I mean, this isn't just news. There's sometimes people seem sort of strange about that. But, in George's case, when we heard he had cancer, I started getting it together, and also then he, of course, was stabbed, and that was kind of dicey. So I'd had an opportunity to actually redo his obit 2 or 3 times in his last few years. And strangely enough, I remember that the first thing that the Times did was put one of the old versions up online.
Oh, wow.
He was like, well, why?
my-
You know, I've changed it. It's different. It's better now, you know?
Actually, I was thinking in terms of actually of a Beatle fan, because if you remember, as early as July, there were indications that that he was very ill and probably
Well,
didn't have a lot of.
I had written, I did almost nightly updates on Abbey Road, back when
Yeah,
doing
Right,
the
right.
website.
right,
And I was keeping very close touch on that. And in fact, I heard later somebody told me that the Harrison family noticed what I had done, so which was kind of interesting. But
yeah,
I had never heard from anybody. But I mean,
yeah,
and I look back at some of the stuff that I had done, and I really did keep a very close monitor on it. I mean, there wasn't a lot of there was no Facebook back then, so there wasn't all the, flashing with the
Yeah.
instant links like there is now. But I found I had a lot of stuff back then, and
Yeah.
right.
and I
But
I remember getting a phone call from my friend Joe Caldwell. Hello, Joe, if you're listening, who called me at like 3 a.m. and said he told me he had passed away. And I got up at 3 o'clock and I started writing, and I never went to bed.
right,
I stayed up
Yeah.
night.
But I remember talking, at least via email, with Bill King back in July and asking him, since obviously in the case of John Lennon, there was no chance to kind of prepare for how you were going to cover, the death of a Beatle. I was asking Bill about, how we were going to go about covering it. And, he was kind of saying at that point that, well, let's hope for the best and sort of play it by ear. And what had happened was that in the interim between then in July and when George actually passed at the end of November, September 11th had happened.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so I think people's emotions were certainly in the New York area where I lived at the time, people's emotions were very close to the surface anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think, they were that, even though we had known that George was very ill and we were kind of prepared for his death, still that happening nearly on top of September 11th was really kind of hard to process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On an emotional level.
I didn't know what to think at the time because, on the one hand, I knew that George wanted his privacy. And at the same time, I heard the quote that he said, "I'm not dying on you folks just yet."
Mhm.
So when I heard that quote, it made me think, well, he's still got some time left. I wasn't expecting it to happen when it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, fortunately, I don't live in the New York area anymore, so I don't have to hear the commercials for that doctor, Gil Lederman, who,
wow.
who treated him at, whatever hospital he was connected with at the time, but also at the same time was, trying to get autographs from him, get autographed guitars and things like that, which was really, really inappropriate.
Yeah.
Disgusting. Really disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So every time I would hear one of his infomercials or the commercials for, whichever program he was associated with at that moment, because he had to switch a few times,
I never heard any of those.
Yeah,
Strangely.
on AM radio. He probably still does infomercials on.
I hear them.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny that when it actually happened. I mean, on one hand, part of my job was to sort of keep the obituary up to date and, make sure that it was going to, because it was obviously going to go on the front page, and so that means also that it gets a lot more scrutiny from the editors too, because everybody sort of suddenly wants to participate and everyone has opinions. But it's interesting that once it happened, the rest of the paper sort of kicked into gear, and we're trying to figure out what to do for an arts and leisure piece the coming Sunday, and or maybe the Sunday after, because I think it was late in the week. But they ended up going to the composer Philip Glass, and it was just an interesting idea because there's not too much they had in common, except Ravi Shankar at the time. Philip Glass studied with Ravi Shankar in about 1965. And his music, went in a completely different direction, obviously, but they had that in common, and I thought that was an interesting thing to do. There was also an editorial by, one of the sort of editorial writers who I think lived up in a cabin in New England or something, named Verlin Klinkenberg. And it just was interesting to me what people noticed. The thing I remember about Verlin Klinkenberg's piece was he was fascinated with the way George held the guitar, how high he held it. And, and it's just sort of interesting. People notice different things, and, and it's absolutely true. He did hold it in an interesting way, but it didn't really occur to me. And on the other hand, I spent part of the day watching TV news to see what they were doing, because I'd already filed my piece. I'd already persuaded them to put the update online instead of the old one, and before I went into the office, I had sort of set up all of the VHS and beta machines to record as many channels as I could, so that I could document this. And when I watched it, I was just astonished. I think this was the first time I really noticed that there was already a generation gap between us and people who were just getting into those jobs now. Because, the thing that stuck in my mind was some news anchor saying, and George Harrison was very important in bringing to light Native American music. Because it obviously was, it was obviously, she got the copy that said Indian music, and obviously that wasn't PC from her point of view, and it hadn't occurred to her that there is an India, and there are Indians, and they have music. So it just was kind of astonishing. It also meant here was someone who had no idea what George Harrison did. And that to me was totally inconceivable, because, we all grew up, and what the four of them were doing was basically the main thing you needed to keep tabs on.
Sure.
Right.
But yeah, oh well.
And we all get that a lot now with a lot of artists.
God.
I know,
Yes.
but
young
man,
people have no idea who they are.
Right.
But
You could tell that a couple of weeks ago, when within 3 days, Leonard Cohen and Leon Russell passed, you could tell that the news anchors on most local TV stations had no idea who these people were.
right.
Oh well. So
Can I mention a couple more things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to George, I think of someone who is actually not really known for being eclectic musically, but he really is.
Oh, yeah.
And if you study, especially his solo career, you'll pick up so many different musical genres. But if you span, the Beatles and the solo, you not only have rockers and ballads, but you've got the spiritual stuff, the Indian music. You've got the rockabilly music that he loved so much, the Paul Perkins. Country and Western, which you could tie in with rockabilly. When I hear a song like Fish on the Sand, very country and Western to me. The Oriental music that he did, which I love, and nobody ever really talks about. A song like Breath Away from Heaven and Shanghai Surprise. I love what he did there. Exploring, Oriental music there and using, those instruments, that instrumentation in his music. That was very different at the time for him. And I love the fact that he explored that. Going back to all the pre-rock He loved Hoagie Carmichael, covered a couple of his songs,
Sure.
covered Cole Porter's True Love. And
Mhm.
actually, if you go back to Shanghai Surprise, he did a song called Hottest Gong in Town, which
Oh,
is
right.
an original song of his, which harkens back to a 1930s type sound,
Yeah.
which, everybody associates Paul with. But George was into that too.
Hmm.
He could have done that. And also, the fact that he played the ukulele. I did an interview with Greg Hawkes a few years ago. And Greg, for, most people probably know he was in the Cars, and he played keyboards in the group. And he made an album that was all cover versions of Beatles songs on ukulele.
Hmm.
And he brought up the fact, he said that there seems to be a lot of interest in the uke these days. There are uke conventions now.
Sure.
And he credits George Harrison, and to a lesser degree Paul, because Paul was playing the ukulele on Ram On, but Paul goes on stage and does the tribute to George by playing something on uke. But the fact that, George embraced the ukulele the way that he did as helping to ignite this interest in the ukulele these days.
In fact, in Chicago, there's a Harrison associated ukulele group which meets, I believe, every couple of weeks. And in fact, they've participated in the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans for a number of years. In fact, a couple of years there, they tried to stage the world's largest ukulele jam.
Right. Yeah. And also, I mentioned previous show the guy Jake Shimabukuro, who's a ukulele player. He became famous because he covered "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" on the uke, and it was recorded when he was in Central Park, and there was a video made. It was put on YouTube, and it helped to give him his career and a recording career. So this whole thing that a lot of people don't really give George credit for. And you talked about his humor and the Traveling Wilburys. You got to mention Monty Python.
Of
How it
course.
helped Monty Python with the Life for Brian. George was such a fascinating person because there were so many opposites in his character. Like you were saying, Alan, there was a real dark, moody, serious side to him, and there was a very humorous, comical side to him. The same guy that loved gardening. He loved gardening, and then he liked something dangerous like race car driving at the same time. It's the same guy that loves both. The yin and yang of everything. So,
in fact, speaking of his humor, there's a story that we really can't tell in full, but you can find on the John Scheinfeld film about Harry Nilsson, who is Harry Nilsson and why is everybody talking about him? About
I think I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, at Harry's burial in 1994, and George said, brought up a certain song. I can tell you at least the main title of it. It's a song from Harry's Son of Schmilson album called "You're Breaking My Heart." But
that gives it all away.
Right. So if you go if you have the DVD of the film, take a look at it. You'll know the full story. But George kind of initiated this sing along at Harry's graveside of that song.
Yeah, and Harry would have loved it.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yes, he definitely would have.
Okay, so that was our, I guess, let's say 15th anniversary tribute and reminiscence of George Harrison, and we'll delve into his individual albums in the year to come, no doubt. So thanks for listening. You can contact us at thingswesaidtoday@gmail.com. Send us emails, send us letters, send us suggestions, comments, questions. And sometimes we answer, sometimes we're trying to save some up to answer on the show if you have any that you think would be pertinent. You can follow us on Twitter at symbol things we said fab. We have a Facebook page, Things We Said Today, Beatles Radio Fans. And Ken, how do people get in touch with you?
They can email me at everylittlething@att.net. And I just want to mention something that's going on my website right now, kenmichaelsradio.com. I do have, as part of my Beatles trivia and games page, copies of 8 Days a Week on Blu-ray, the deluxe version, to give away. So I do have a trivia question or a game that gets posted every Monday, and you have a full week to answer. So if you just go to that page, then you could possibly win that amongst all these other great prizes. And I also have a special contest, which will start on December the 3rd. And Al, do you remember Lonnie Ostro?
I remember the name, yes.
Okay, well, Lonnie is a guy that I've known since the early 90s. He used to be part of a Beatles radio program called Beyond the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, Mike Lynch, a friend of ours who's been a guest on this show, was also a co-host with Lonnie. Well, Lonnie's written a brand new book. He's actually a novelist now. And it's called Poet of the Wrong Generation. And it's all about this guy in the early 90s who's very young. He writes poetry, has never really written songs at all, hooks up with someone at his high school, and ends up getting a record contract. And he becomes a star practically overnight. And only he discovers that being a star is not what it's cracked up to be. And there's constant references to 60s artists throughout the book. And it's all about someone who really loved the great poets of our time. Lennon, McCartney, Dylan, Paul Simon. They mention Harry Chapin, someone like that, Jim Croce. Mm-hmm. And he feels like he's in a world in the early 90s now where people can't relate, young people can't relate to lyricists and poets who are putting out really strong material that actually have a message and say something. So he's trying to do that with his music. But there's lots of Beatle references in there, and I'm giving away copies of that book, which Lonnie will sign himself, Poet of the Wrong Generation. So if you can, visit my website. It's part of my special contest, along with my Beatles trivia page.
Okay, Steve, how do people get in contact with you?
People can email me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I have a Facebook page, which alternates between personal Facebook page, which alternates between music and politics. But my Beatles news group, Beatles News and Commentary, is just music. If that's that's only your thing, and I post links to stories, and I post various Beatles news things there. So come by there and talk Beatles.
Okay, Al.
Very simple. Facebook, Al Sussman. Twitter at ASUSS49, or through Beatle Fan Magazine, www.beatlefan.com.
Okay, and you can reach me through Facebook at either Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed. I may do Alan Kozin mono and stereo at some point, but Remixed will do for now. Thanks again for listening, and for Ken Michaels, Steve Marinucci, and Al Sussman, this is Alan Kozin saying see you next time.